Titles should be held by champions.
Welcome to Tragic Tales of Wrestling, The Rise, The Fall, and Rise Again of Perry Saturn. I'm your host, Tommy Guns, and welcome to a brand new episode. Now, tonight we're going to be talking about Perry Saturn, a man who is very underrated in my opinion, who should have went a lot farther in the WCW, WWE, and ECW. Not in that order, of course. Tonight we're going to go over his hardships, his humble beginnings, and some interesting facts as well. So, let me see here. I'm just trying to do some things here. All right. So, let me pull out my handy dandy notes and we'll start from the beginning. Now, I'm going to go back to my essay, to my notes, just to read, to go in an order, to give you my ideas and opinions. But let's start from the beginning. Perry Saturn, born Perry Arthur Stillo, was born on October 25th, 1966 in Cleveland, Ohio. He is a retired professional wrestler who has left a significant mark on the wrestling world during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Most of you may not remember him. He was in there for a very little time, but the mark he left was pretty big. Us deep cut fans remember Perry very well. He was known for his physical ferocity and his resilience. Saturn's life and career is a testament to perseverance both inside and outside of the ring. His journey from a rough upbringing through the ranks of professional wrestling to his personal struggles and redemption reflects a life full of highs and lows. Damn, I'm a good writer. All right. So Stello, also known as Perry Saturn, grew up in a tough neighborhood in Cleveland, a place where it was hard living and was a fact of life. His upbringing shaped his resilience and nonsense persona, which would later define him as a wrestler. Now, growing up, he also had an abusive stepfather, and because of this, actually on one abusive episode, his stepfather was the reason why he got his lazy eye. He beat him so bad that Perry developed his famous whatchamacallit. I think it's his right eye, his right lazy eye. He trained in jiu-jitsu and karate, which would help him later on in life, especially defending off his father and such like that. Seeking discipline and direction, Perry enlisted in the United States Army, serving as a member of the elite 75th Ranger Regiment. Now that, it's on record that Perry actually scored high enough on his ACTs and SATs to become a Ranger, but he was around during peacetime, so he never really saw any action. His military service provided him with the discipline and physical conditioning and mental toughness that would become critical in his future wrestling career. Now, this is just the start. Now, it's gone on record that Perry said he never thought he would be a wrestler. He never thought that he would be even close enough. He was just a short, buff guy, but after being in the military, it raised his confidence enough to go and try it out and to go seek it. And this brings us to his wrestling beginnings. After leaving the military, Saturn found himself drawn to professional wrestling, a sport that combined his love for physical competition and theatrical entertainment. He began his wrestling training under the tutelage of the famous Walter Killer Kowalski. And if you don't know who Killer Kowalski is, he's a very famous old school classic wrestler. He was big back in the day. He was known for his toughness, his skills, and everything like that. And he trained a lot of wrestlers. He trained people like Triple H, which actually, fun fact, Perry was taught under Triple H before Triple H actually went up to WWE. It was his trainer was Triple H at the Killer Kowalski School. Killer Kowalski is known for the claw. He's known for various other wrestling moves that he implicated. I mean, this man, look him up. He's a legend. He made up the thing where he bites people's heads, which was pretty interesting. My dad loves that move. He began his wrestling training under, I'm going back, Walter Killer Kowalski, like I said. A legendary wrestler and trainer known for producing some of the industry's top talents. Like I said, Triple H is one of them. And I believe China was another one as well. It was under Kowalski's guidance that Perry Saturn honed his craft and adopted his highly aggressive, high impact style that would define him as a wrestler. Now, if you remember Perry Saturn like I do, back in the day, he was rough, gruff, mean, and tough. He would go around like just body slamming people ruthlessly, throwing heavy closed hand punches, just one tough son of a bitch. He was a hoss that met a technical wrestler. If you don't know what a hoss is, look up people like Stan Hansen, Vader, all those big men. He was a mini Hoth for sure. His aggressive style actually got him into trouble various times, which we'll get into. He actually, we'll get into this too when we get into his ECW career, but he's injured wrestlers before. He has a very weird thing with jobbers where he's always getting in trouble and for some reason getting in trouble because of jobbers. But again, we'll get into that. Saturn's early days in wrestling were spent on the independent circus, working for smaller promotions like United States Wrestling Association, USWA for short, and Extreme Championship Wrestling. Now, this is where his career gets interesting. This is when I was talking about his more brash style and persona. During this time, he was in a tag team known as excuse me, the Eliminators. And during that time, he teamed up with a wrestler known as Cronus. And both were known for their hard hitting style, technical paralysis, and overall ring knowledgeability. Um, because of this, Saturn really honed in his own skills and became a legend in his own right, a personal favorite by the ECW crowd. Now, because of this hard hitting technical style and everything that's Perry Saturn prevailed in the ring, he one time broke legendary wrestler Sabu's neck. About, what was it, 15 seconds into the match, Perry picked him up for a regular old suplex, went to throw him back, threw him too hard, threw him too high, threw him too fast, and Sabu came down on his neck. Miraculously, Sabu came back 2 weeks later to wrestle again for ECW. Fun fact. Very interesting there. I mean, that man is tougher than a bag of nails. Oh my goodness. And in ECW, he found himself as a showcase of a hardcore environment. ECW was known for their more hardcore showcases. Look up for matches like New Jack versus what's his name, the famous table spot. You got Taz and Sabu matches. You got classic death matches. You got people like that. Mick Foley ran through there. Stone Cold Steve Austin started his career there. ECW was a perfect launching pad for Perry Saturn. Um, Due to this, again, he developed a hardcore style, which also saw him in a lot of hardcore matches. During this process of being in ECW, he slowly moved away from the tag team division into his own persona. That's what led to the matches like Sabu, Taz, Dean Malenko, Raven, I believe. I believe I saw a couple matches with Raven, Tommy Dreamer, all the classic hardcore wrestlers. Oh my goodness. Sorry, my notes. Saturn would later leave ECW for WCW, where he caught the attention of Eric Bischoff, who was starting a cruiserweight division at the time. When he was starting the cruiserweight division, he had people like Psychosis, um, Psychosis, Saturn, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, and I'm trying to name more underground ones like Jujin Thunder Liger, La Parka, all those guys, all guys known for their short stature and high impact, high flying, high technical wrestling paralysis. These guys were good. They were the up and comers without really being the up and comers. They were more so like Cannon Father, just the show fill in for the bigger guys. They were promised a lot of things in WCW, like, creative control, things like, we're going to push you up to the main card. You just wait. This is a starting point. A lot of those guys never made it past it, was fueled a lot of frustration within WCW's cruiserweight division. You had such classic matches as Perry Saturn versus Dean Malenko, again, him versus Eddie Guerrero, that were hugely overviewed. I believe those matches got 4 stars, which back in the day, getting a WCW match to 4 stars, especially if you looked at the environment and the surroundings of the time, WCW was more known for soapy opera and big slow guy entertainment. I mean, I love big men slapping meat, but WCW was more for where the big boys play, as their old catchphrase would go. And you'd suddenly learn that like the cruiserweight division was kind of used as just filler for those storylines, fillers for those wrestlers, and that's why they didn't utilize those guys a lot in the upper card, is because they wanted to keep them in the mid card just for entertainment purposes and give the stars like Hogan, Steiner, Nash, um, Sting, which nothing wrong with Sting. He works with cruiserweights, but all those bigger guys, all those bigger names and everything. And his career in WCW saw him like just hitting a wall, much like most of the cruiserweight division. You had people like Chris Jericho who said that like eventually you were just recycling through the same people and over again. The matches got more exciting, but the storylines got more watered down. It just didn't make sense for the time, which fueled a lot of frustration with them. Fueled a lot of frustration with a lot of people that would eventually leave to WWE. Saturn was signed in 1997, where he quickly rose through the ranks of the cruiserweight division. WCW provided a national platform that made him one of the more known, tougher, high persona guys. Combined with his new unique wrestling style that made him a fan favorite, Saturn was very over with the fans. That's why I'm even talking about him today. Perry Saturn was one of the best underrated wrestlers who should have deserved more championships, like Intercontinental Champion, European Champion, but never just got over. Like for some reason, like he's so memorable to people like me. He was known for his stiff martial arts influence offense and his finisher, the Rings of Saturn, a brutal double armbar submission hold that became a signature move that would define his career. Now, the Rings of Saturn kind of looks like a reverse Steiner recliner to me. If you don't know what a Steiner recliner is, look that up. Look up the Rings of Saturn. Look up the band Rings of Saturn. They are just check them out. After you check out this podcast on all streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple, and Amazon. We're also on things like iHeartRadio, so on and so forth. We're available on all streaming platforms. Sorry about that swerve. Just had to get that out there. In WCW, Banner became of the Flock, a faction. Yeah, sorry, a faction led by the Immaculate Raven. The group of misfit wrestlers wreaked havoc in the company, and Saturn was one of the Raven's key enforcers. He played a major role in their success, despite his role in the Flock. Saturn's popularity grew, and eventually he broke away from the group to pursue a singles career. Now, the Flock was an interesting, like, kind of anti-hero group. They were going against the main frame of what WCW was. They were getting away from the NWO. They were getting away from things like, the Hogans, the Nash, everything like that. And Saturn was pretty much used as a muscle in that group. Now, I real quick want to look up who was all in the Flock. Just straight up because I didn't watch a lot of WCW. I was a WWE guy through and through. I did like my WCW wrestlers, so the leader of the Flock, of course, was Raven. Then you got Saturn, who was known as the Enforcer. Kidman, who was said to be homeless before joining the group. Storyline. I'm literally reading this off the Chat GPT of Google. Laudel, Raven's most loyal lackey who needed his approval to join the group. Steven Richards, as we know from Right to Censored and ECW fame. Raven's lackey from ECW who left WCW after failing physically. Hammer, a former heavy metal star who was released by WCW. There's a lot of people in the Flock. I never realized this. No wonder why I wouldn't have known all these people. Horns, the nephew of Hollywood Hulk Hogan, the WCW World Heavyweight Champion at the time. Canyon, we all know who Canyon is, feuded with Raven before joining the group. And it just keeps going on. Let's go with the last two. Reese, an outsider due to his large size, joined the group. A former American male wrestler who was temporarily blinded in one eye after Raven performed a drop toe hold on him. I don't remember a lot of these wrestlers. I do remember Canyon, of course. I remember Horns. I remember Steven Richards, of course. Kidman, obviously. But Saturn was the muscle. He was the group. He left eventually because he was more than the group itself. I mean, like it was like I hate to talk about this man because I'm not a fan of him. It was like a Ryback situation. He grew larger than his role. He was like an enforcer. He wasn't an enforcer at first. I take that back. That's a very bad example. Batista, when he was Deacon Batista, along with Devon Dudley, when he was doing the preacher role, and he broke out eventually due to his size and in-ring ability. Even though Batista wasn't good at the time, he broke out because of that, much like Perry Saturn did from the Flock. The Flock was a very interesting thing. Did see videos of it. I did see bits and clips, like I always like to say. I didn't see half those wrestlers in it. It was more so based on Perry Saturn, obviously. Oh my goodness. My notes keep going back to the top. The group eventually broke up and Saturn began his singles career. His feud with Raven and other promptu members of WCW star, including Chris Jericho, Billy Kidman, solidified his status as one of the company's top mid-cards. And that was the problem with Saturn. He did not want to be a top mid-card. He wanted to be a top card. In my opinion, he deserved it. At least something like a, title run with the Intercontinental title, European one, and little matches against, already made guys like Hogan and Nash at the time would have been something that probably would have kept Saturn around. But alas, that's what happens. Oh my goodness, my notes, sorry. His transition into WWF, WWE. Now, remember, this was a big deal at the time. There was a lot of guys going over to WWE from WCW. You had your Chris Jerichos, you had your Dean Malenkos, which was part of this faction, Eddie Guerrero's. Who else? We got Rhino, from ECW fame. All these wrestlers. But in 2000, when Saturn made his debut in the World Wrestling Federation, now known as the WWE, the premier wrestling promotion globally later became. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I reread what I just talked about. Alongside fellow wrestlers in WCW, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and Dean Malenko, Saturn formed the Radicals, a group of talented technical wrestlers who made an immediate impact in the WWF. This move was a major turning point in Saturn's career, and it gave him the opportunity to work on the largest stage of professional wrestling. Let's go to the notes. Now, as we all know, I didn't get into this in the WCW, but he was started to dabble in drugs a little bit. In ECW, he was relatively clean, but in WCW, he has cited that he was high all the time, that he has no memory of some of the points in his career, no memory of some of the things that he did, no memories of storylines, no memory of matches, no memories of pretty much anything. And we'll see how that trials into his life after when he gets out of wrestling. In WWE, his drug addiction was so bad that he used to inject needles underneath his tongue just so they wouldn't find the needle tread marks. And fun fact, when he was in WCW, he failed tests 3 different times, and they asked him, how could they help you, Saturn? And he said, well, stop testing me. And they stopped testing him. Fun fact. These are just struggles and things that we haven't really talked about in Perry Saturn's career. Like I said, from ECW, he was clean. To WCW, he was high all the time. And WWE, he was just massively gone. And this was just the start. Like I said, in early 2000s, he deflected from WCW, and alongside with fellow wrestlers Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Saturn formed the Radicals, a group of talented technical wrestlers who made an immediate impact in the WWF. This move was a major turning point in Saturn's career as it gave him the opportunity to work on the world's largest stage. I believe I just reread that. But just going back to the point of how big this was for him and how his drug addiction was actually taking over so hard at the time that he doesn't really remember this. He remembers going to WWE. He remembers how they showed up. I believe they showed up in a match between Chris Jericho and Triple H. They were sitting in the front row. Something provoked, I believe, Saturn, and they jumped the barricade, and they pretty much beat the two up in the ring. And that is how the Radicals started. They were like kind of short lived. We'll get into that. Although his entail run with the Radicals was successful, Saturn's career to WWF would be marked by inconsistency. He had a memorable moment, including a storyline. He developed an affection for a mop that he named Moppy. Now, what started with that was actually this incident with Mike Bell. There was this botch that made Saturn mad. It was I believe he came off the rope and started throwing punches. He hit Saturn too hard. Saturn started throwing actual closed fist punches. And remember, Saturn was on a lot of drugs and was pretty much out of his mind at the time. The botch was an accident. Then after that, he threw Mike Bell out of the ring. And within throwing him, he hit the floor. His legs actually got caught on the rope and he hit the floor head first. Saturn was blamed for this pretty hardcore and within reason. I think some of it was him trying to like take off heat when he pushed away the other wrestler or something like that. He was trying to portray to him, if you watch the match, that, hey, you're hitting too hard. You need to slow down. But, Saturn also may or may not have thrown out of the ring and caused him a concussion. We don't know. He wasn't there. We weren't there. Now, fun fact about Mike Bell, if you've ever seen the movie Bigger, Faster, Stronger, it's actually the director's brother. And I won't tell you the twist with the whole thing with that. They get into that in the movie. They don't really talk about Perry Saturn too much in it. They just kind of show the clip, show how his brother did the botch, got beat up. Now, because of that incident and another incident with a jobber, let's see what his name was. Did not write it down. I believe it was Richard. It was a local talent. There was a jobber that wouldn't work with Saturn. Let's just call the guy Richard. And you can look this video up on YouTube. Remember earlier how he said he had a lot of weird, unfortunate issues with jobbers that kind of plagued his career with incidents and controversy? Well, this one wouldn't sell to him. This one would not. And selling in wrestling's where, you punch somebody, you sell the move. You react to the move. You do it, in wrestling, if you don't sell, you're showing disrespect. You're showing that you're going in on the business of your own, which wrestling is built on a lot of trust. And because of that trust, you say that you're going to sell. You say you're going to keep your opponent safe. This guy did none of that. And it pissed off Saturn, and he beat him the hell up. Started throwing real punches, trying to keep him down. The guy would refuse pinfalls, so Saturn beat him in submission to get a pinfall and still wasn't successful. So it threw him in a realistic looking armbar, and the guy eventually tapped out, probably because of pain, not even because of storyline. Now, because of those two incidents, there's this bizarre storyline. This is kind of near the end of the Radicals run, it was before everybody kind of broke out on their own singles careers and everything like that. It was called the Moppy gimmick. And what it was is that for some reason, Perry Saturn fell in love with a mop and then he drew a face on it. And there was a whole storyline where Perry Saturn stole Al Snow's head, and in turn, Al Snow stole Moppy. Moppy was put in a wood chipper, but did not die. Almost died. Look this story up online. It is ridiculous. And it goes into how like his drug problems really plagued him at this time. He doesn't remember it at all. He goes on and says that he does not remember the Moppy storyline at all. I had to wet my whistle there. I apologize. But because of the Moppy storyline, I think it really just kind of harmed his career. I think that is like people thought it was funny, but took him more of as a joke, from this serious enforcer role from when he was in the flock with the Raven to this joke guy who's fallen in love with a mop. And the end of his career was in 2002. Now let's get into his personal life and struggles. Following his departure from WWE, Saturn faced numerous personal struggles, injuries in particular to his knee and his neck. Remember we talked about earlier how he was suffering from a lot of injuries and he hurt his neck in some matches in ECW. I think we got into this one match early on in his career where he attempted to dive outside the ring, fell straight on his head, cracked his head open so severe that actually some of it was caved in, got it stapled up, came out later that night, competed, bleeding all over through his band-aid, and that was just the start of it. So, like I'm saying, he has injuries particular to his knees and back. That took a heavy toll on his body. Additionally, Saturn was struggling with substance abuse, a battle that many wrestlers faced back in his era. We've talked about people like Doink. We've talked about people like Test, China, who all struggled with drug addiction. Crash Holly was another one that we did. Um, all severe drug problems. Most of them did not end well. It pretty much ended them. Saturn was looking to be one of those statistics again. Now he was addicted to things like painkillers, which eventually formed into an addiction of heroin. Saturn would reportedly spend over $1,000 every couple days to support his habit, which eventually made him broke, which made him homeless again. After 2004, Perry Saturn lost everything and disappeared. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody kept in contact with him. Nobody knew anything that happened, except one storyline that came out in, I believe, 2006, where he fought off a rape situation. Viewer discretion advised. We're about to get into a subject that is very sensitive to some, and even though it has a positive outcome, it is still something that might be, I don't want to say offensive, but not up to viewer taste all the time. We are going to talk into sexual abuse. So the story goes is that Saturn was walking with his wife, which we will get into. He has a wife now. Was walking with his wife when he witnessed two men hovering over a woman trying to take off her clothes. Saturn intervened, and as we know, he has a background in jujitsu and karate and all that stuff. And supposedly, he fought these two men off. He was shot in the collarbone and in the neck, and luckily, ambulance showed up in time to help him. Well, help get rid of the men that were trying to commit the crime and to help him. He claims that he has no bone in his collarbone, and he does have a scar right there, and he has metal plates in there. He also claims that he's got a scar on his neck from where he got shot. You cannot see that. He said plastic surgery helped with that. Plastic surgery, keep that in mind. We'll get into that later. And then we'll get back into that story later as well. In the early 2009, he came back into the spotlight after he was inducted into the Cauliflower Ear Hall of Fame. After that, he started talking about his story, his struggles with drug abuse, his pain, his addiction to painkillers, and everything like that. When he came out in 2009 to talk about all this, this is the first time that we heard about Saturn. And he openly admitted to struggling from things like memory loss, lapse of judgment, hazy vision, which are clear signs of CTE. And CTE, if you don't know, is caused by many concussions over a long period of time. CTE stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I probably butchered the hell out of that. And they believe like such wrestlers as China, uh, Chris Benoit, and other various tests, even Crash Holly, Daphne from TNA. They believe all these wrestlers suffered from CTE, and a lot of them donated their brain to science, which actually showed that some of them were suffering from the effects of CTE. Interestingly enough, Perry Saturn is living with CTE right now, and it shows all the signs and symptoms of it. He's not going the route of a Benoit, and he's just claiming that because of the CTE, it's making his life harder. He has sobered up since 2009. He thanks his dog and his wife. His wife helped him along and helped him develop as a person he is today. And when he got a dog, he said he wants to live long enough to outlive his dog, so then he knows he's taken care of her whole life, which was something that made me almost tear up. I will not lie. Since 2009, he's gone on multiple interviews, as far as 2022, he's kind of dropped off the face of the earth again right now. It's not to say he's not doing good. You still get random stories that say he's doing just fine. Um, despite having CTE. Now, because of the CTE, as we were talking about memory loss, confusion, blurry vision, and all that kind of stuff, people started to talk about the rape story that Saturn fought off those two gentlemen from. And they started to look into things like police reports, hospital stays, anything like that. And they found nothing that was reported. They found no report that says that. They found no report, and this is in 2002. They found no report on the day that I couldn't find the date, but I found the day. They couldn't find any report of Saturn checking into a hospital either under his real name or under his gimmick name that whole year. Not even just the day of that whole year, which is not surprising not to go to a hospital for a whole year, but you think at some point Saturn might have checked into it for some various reason, but they couldn't find anything like that. Now, that's not to say Perry made it up. He might be confused. He might be suffering from the effects of CTE. Um, we do not know. I mean, he is a living man with the condition. There's this ex wrestler who developed CTE too as well, and I can't think of his name. Let's look it up real quick. Wrestler CTE Foundation. And he was actually the one, if you watch the McMahon documentary or anything like that, you will see this guy on it. And he actually worked close with the NFL and WWE. And his name is Chris Nowinski. He was a former professional wrestler who's currently the CEO of the Concussion Legacy Foundation and is involved in the fight against chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Again, I probably ruined that. He developed it as well. He suffers from the same things as Perry does: memory loss, hazy vision, complete lapse in judgments, all that kind of stuff. Nowinski has spent his life after his career in wrestling researching all this kind of stuff. He actually looked at China's brain and Chris Benoit's brain. They compared them to 86-year-old Alzheimer patients living in 30 to 40-year-old bodies. Now imagine what Perry Saturn looks like after multiple he cracked a skull in, for God's sakes, and he has neck injuries, which probably messes up your brainstem. Now, the rise of Perry Saturn, which I promise there's a questionable rise, is how much people are looking into things such as CTE now, where people are looking into wrestlers that have fallen short after being in wrestling, wrestlers that have died in similar ways that Perry Saturn was building up to. And it shed a lot of light. You got things like Dark Side of the Ring, you got movies like The Iron Claw, and you got podcasts like me, Tragic Tales of Wrestling. And that's not to say that's all thanks to Perry Saturn, but because of his contributions of just openly talking about it, openly talking about the problems in professional wrestling and the life afterwards on it, he has done leaps and bounds for a lot. We may not be hearing from him right now, and that might be by design. The dude might just want to be relaxed and doing his own thing. We don't know, but he seems to be happy doing his own thing despite his own struggles. He's sober now, and despite other bumps in the roads, we still got Perry Saturn around. Now, I'd like to end this podcast with saying that I believe that Perry Saturn should have been a champion of some sort. He did have his reigns and stuff like that, but he never got the spotlight he deserves. And I believe he tried harder and pushed himself even more just to make up for that. And that's ultimately ruined his career in wrestling. Sometimes I think that worth ethic needs to be noticed more than promo skills in wrestling. Not to say that's going to make him the top guy or anything, but just enough to, put him somewhere. This is a short one today. We're about 10 minutes early, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. We have another episode planned for next week, of course. I got to decide if you guys have any ideas, please comment them below. I will look into them, and I think I got one in mind, and I think it might be a two-parter if we can get away with it. We're keeping this one short because I got to do some research on it. If I want to go that route, but please suggest some in the comments below. I hope you guys, in my closing thoughts, don't go out there yucking anybody's yum. I hope you have a good day, a good month, a good year. I hope that you enjoyed your time spending with me listening to about tragic stories in wrestling. I hope that you enjoyed the time you've spent listening to our podcast, and I'd like to personally thank you. We're going to be coming at you live every Tuesday for the foreseeable future. It will be switched up eventually, but that probably won't be till the new year. I have been Tommy Guns. You have been listening to Tragic Tales of Wrestling. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful night.
Titles should be held by champions.